Reverend David Carson is helping to bring transformation to Canada. But his journey started with a message preached in a language he did not understand. He's here to tell us more. Reverend, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, it's a real pleasure to be with you this morning.
Now, of course, you hail from my side of the pond, from London originally.
That's right. I'm a North Londoner, and I used to live quite near to the Highbury football ground.
And now I know that you support Arsenal, but we won't hold it against you.
Okay, right.
But tell us about your conversion, because it's quite a powerful story, because you were a science student.
Yes.
You lived by logic and that only, and then?
That's right. At the age of 19, I was a science student and a bit of a know-it-all, and someone who was confident in myself. And if you were to ask me what was my sin, you know, I was quite a good person, but my real sin was that I worshipped myself as God. I loved me. I worship me. And so God had to take me to Canada. In the summer of '64, I went to see my granddad in St. John, New Brunswick. Now, in those days, St. John was a very quiet little town. Nothing much was moving except the leaves on the trees. But the excitement for the people was in the local Pentecostal church. Now, I was not a churchgoer, but my cousin took me to the Full Gospel Assembly, and I thought they were mad. I'd never seen anything like it. Hundreds of people with their hands in the air and jigging about and looking very happy, which was very un-English. My experience was Anglican churches where, you know, people...
Who were sensible.
People behaved themselves.
Yeah.
And then I went a second time, and I thought, not only are these people mad, they are sincere. I thought they're sincerely mad. And the last thing I wanted was to be one of them. But you know, my cousin, he invited me a third time, and against my better judgment, I ended up going that third Sunday evening to the gospel service. And again, I thought it was absurd that the pastor was preaching on the evils of space travel. He was preaching against science, and here am I with chemistry, physics, and math, and he's completely missing it. For a gospel preacher, he was not making it for me that night.
Right.
Until all of a sudden, I guess halfway through his sermon, which he never finished, a man stood up in front of me and hollered, thundered in an unknown language. And I looked around, and people were starting to pray. People were bowing their heads. The pastor stopped preaching. And
you said, thank goodness.
And, well, the fear of God came on me. Look, here, all of a sudden, I started to shake because I knew the awe of God came on me. And when the man stopped speaking, a lady behind me gave the interpretation of what he'd said. That's like in 1 Corinthians 12 or 1 Corinthians 14. You have the gift of tongues and interpretation of tongues. And the interpretation was like Jesus speaking to my heart. Wow. Look, very subjective, but in a moment, I knew Jesus was alive. I knew that I had an opportunity to follow him for the rest of my life. The miracle that happened that night was that the pastor never attempted to finish his message because they knew the Spirit of God had spoken. Wow. He went straight into the appeal. And that night, August the 2nd, 1964, 9 o'clock at night on a Sunday evening, I gave my life to Christ with 6 other people that night. Changed my life.
So let's skip forward. You're now in your 70s, and by the way, you look like you're in your 40s. Oh. So whatever it is you drink, I need a bottle of that.
Well, you can come again. There we are. Okay.
So you're in your 70s, and in Canada, you're doing a lot of work that's changing the nation and equipping young people to go forward. Tell us a bit about some of the exciting things happening.
Well, here in Vancouver, and I can speak clearly for Vancouver, things are happening with the high schoolers, with the young adults, with the young pastors, with the new church plants, and how the bigger churches are planting out satellite churches. Vancouver City has been called the least church city in North America. 1 or 2% of people would normally go to church. I believe that is changing because the kingdom of God is infiltrating every area of society. Amongst the young people, look, the high schoolers, 2 years ago, there was a retreat on Anvil Island, just off the coast here. 40 young people had an incredible week of experience with God. They wanted to continue to meet after that retreat. So they would meet once a month on a Friday night, 40 or 50 kids, high schoolers. That number started to increase. And this is the power of social media. Young people are telling their friends and bringing their friends that something good is happening here. All of a sudden, over the year, 100, 200, 400, 600, 800 high schoolers meeting to worship Jesus with all of their hearts. That is now, after 2 years, in 5 centers in Greater Vancouver. This is exciting.
Reverend, let me ask you, we've got about 60 seconds left. I know you've been to Africa, you've been to the Redeemed Christian Church of God's campground. It's a colossal campground. You've traveled around the world planting churches, but here you are in Canada, in Vancouver, doing work. In 45 seconds, what role has prayer played personally for you in seeing all this work God has done?
Right. Well, for me, one of the surprises in the mid-90s, I'm pastoring a church in East Vancouver, and one night God called me not just to be a pastor, but to be an intercessor. So for the last 20 years, a major part of what I do is based on prayer and in carrying out prayer. And I would say that we are now enjoying the fruit of 20 years, if not more, of prayer for a move of God in this Lower Mainland, this Greater Vancouver area. The prayer track is the first thing that's laying the foundation for this.
David Carson, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story with us.
Hey, what a pleasure. Thank you, Muyiwa.